Good morning. 100 days ago, when we walked in the door, we knew our work was cut out for us. We knew that corruption and serious financial issues were impeding progress and hampering the good work being done by staff in every department here in Nassau County. We knew there were obstacles to good governance that had taken hold throughout the county over the past 8 years, and we knew solving these problems would require a complete reimagining of how government does business. 100 days in, our team, and we have an absolutely phenomenal team, has looked hard at the operations of Nassau County. And today, let's talk about what we've seen thus far. The county executive really laid it out there. The state of the county is fragile. It's fragile because the defining traits that government should strive for, innovation and accountability, had been eclipsed by concealment and corruption. It's fragile because the county and the way the county spends, tracks, and collects your tax dollars is broken. The Comptroller's office should be a check against those issues, but in the past, all too often, it was treated like a procedural rubber stamp. And that rubber stamp culture is over. The old saying, "that's just the way it works," is not a good enough answer anymore. Our role in reforming government relies on us asking the tough questions and demanding answers, serving as the fiscal umpire calling balls and strikes. So when people ask me what I'm surprised about in our first 100 days, I mention that we're constantly finding ourselves defending our right to ask those questions. That's perhaps our most important fight, defending the office's chief responsibility according to the charter to, quote, audit and approve. Whether it's engaging in an audit, paying out a claim, or approving payroll, we have a right and an obligation to ask questions with the goal of getting the best results for taxpayers. And when people push back against us, we push forward. We push forward with audits. Turns out everybody loves to be audited. We push forward talking honestly about the county's finances, and we push forward to use our investigative power on all aspects of county government operations. We do this so that the county can refocus its efforts on investing in programs that people actually care about, results that can make a difference. All of our findings basically boil down and funnel down to two major outcomes: an entrenched culture of corruption and a county truly on the brink of a fiscal emergency. So let's get into the findings. Firstly, decentralized operations. Departments and agencies operate all too often like separate businesses instead of linked components of the county's overall operations. They continuously extend contracts without rebidding, avoid formal bidding by overutilizing blanket orders. Departments have been allowed to use their own workarounds instead of centralized formal bid policies and procedures. The Department of Public Works, for example, does its capital and personnel services contracts on its own, not through centralized purchasing or shared services. That's a risk. In fact, one of my deputy controllers, Jeff Schoen, is an adjunct professor at Hofstra who teaches a class on corruption. And he frequently points out to us that fragmentation and a code of silence are standard practice for a corrupt organization. And the way our county tracks our tax dollars through our financial reporting system is just flat out broken. It's outdated, it's decentralized, it's inefficient. Simple questions like the overall state of the county's finances and how the checkbook is being balanced are met with befuddled looks and differing answers depending on what county department you ask. We found there to be a real lack of transparency in Nassau County. Financial and performance reports released by the county are opaque. They're hard to find, and they're even harder to interpret. County financials are buried in arcane PDF and Excel documents, and they're not presented with real context. It's like putting out the trash. Claims and contracts data are released monthly. There's no documentation to explain how to read and understand the information in those releases. To review payments on a more than monthly basis, someone at home would need to combine a lot of Excel files and have a lot of expertise to really follow what the county is doing. So what we're finding is there's a lot of data out there. We're finding that data has not been utilized for driving driving resource decisions and finding efficiencies. We found that the county has weak internal controls. There's a lack of comprehensive fiscal safeguards that are needed to standardize reporting guidelines and deter fraud. Our accounting staff in the Comptroller's office is forced to waste hundreds of staff hours manually moving data from Excel spreadsheets from one to another. The county has a $3 billion operating budget. That is way too big to manage in Microsoft Excel. We're routinely forced to pay our external auditing firm, as a result, extra money due to the delays in delivering data. And there's no comprehensive accounting of county assets. The stuff that we own, where is it? Where's the inventory of property that the county owns, and vendor contracts? There's no centralized grant management in the county. And despite several audits previously encouraging the county to do so, the county still does not have a complete list of all the properties it owns. We found there's no standard policies or succession planning that protect against work falling through the cracks when an employee leaves the county. This is the stuff that isn't sexy until we hear about what we found. In 2017, when cleaning out a desk of an employee in the police department who had retired months earlier, hundreds of unprocessed claims and past due invoices were found. Some were dated as early as June 2016. We find poor data management and utilization. Here's what I mean by that. Over the past 8 years, the county has had a variety of opportunities to upgrade its financial tracking software, but really failed to do so in a meaningful way. The way we keep track of our data is fundamentally lacking as well. Payroll and accounting data is kept in mainframes that were built in the 1990s. In fact, we're nearing the point, and we've been advised, that we're nearing the point where these systems will just stop working, which would bring the operations of a $3 billion a year county to a grinding halt. In fact, only a handful of employees are able to generate reports due to the antiquated system searching for proverbial needles of data in outdated haystacks. Despite several previous requests, as we all know, there's not one clearinghouse of labor contracts here in the county. So we see a series of really inefficient processes. Looking at our nonprofit partners, who we rely on to deliver critical services to the most vulnerable members of our community, that's who's being impacted by this. When we contract with a nonprofit to help us battle the opioid crisis or homelessness or treating mental health issues, and they have to cut hours or services because the county can't pay its bills on time, that has far-reaching impacts throughout Nassau County. The nonprofits are forced to fill out repetitive paperwork on a regular basis to satisfy the different policies across a variety of departments in the county. We're literally talking about boxes of paperwork that they have to do annually to get their contracts renewed. Their payments are delayed due to a slow contracting and claims process. Recently, I spoke to somebody in one of the prominent nonprofits in Nassau County, and she told me that it takes 8 hours to do a voucher for reimbursement by Nassau County. So the obvious question was, how long should it take? And the answer was, it takes between 10 minutes and 1 hour to do the same work when it comes to New York State. Surely we can catch up. And because their payments are not received for a long time, there is an increased cost to do business for these nonprofits, which means less services to our county residents, drives up their administrative costs and down services. So we've seen some wasteful spending in Nassau County. Nassau County has its version of the bridge to nowhere in the PeopleSoft project. $43 million has been spent on financial and HR software over the past 8 years, which now totals more than 3 times the original cost of the project. And still to this date, there's not very much to show for it. Our findings show that Nassau County government has operated under the guidelines that really promoted short-term, Band-Aid, bubblegum, duct tape style solutions without any real consideration for the price tag in the long term. It's the equivalent of thinking that it's cheaper to buy a pair of scissors instead of a lawnmower to cut your grass. Until you factor in how many hours it's going to take to cut your grass with scissors instead of a real lawnmower. So here's what we're finding on the county's finances. Poor fiscal controls. The county's rainy day fund is truly insufficient and trending downward at this point. The litigation fund will be depleted, and $300 million in potential judgments remain outstanding. Outstanding tax cert liability is $500 million, and that's on a $3 billion budget. That is way too much. All of our labor agreements have expired. The current budget does not take into account any potential contractual increases. The mid-year NIFR report shows that the county has a $57 million structural budget gap. Recurring expenditures do not meet recurring revenues, period. That is the definition of a fiscal crisis. Three different accounting standards are being used across the county, often guided, frankly, by whatever one paints the best picture on any given day. So the county has had a fiscal crisis. We moved into a control period, and now we stand truly on the brink of a fiscal emergency. If you look at where we are and you project forward, looking at the problems the county faces with the assessment system and the upcoming SALT deduction cap, that's the fiscal emergency. The county is now fixing the failed assessment policies from the prior administration. Property values are going to be going up for many homeowners for the first time in many years. The property tax grievance system, as we know, is truly inequitable. And while reassessment is ongoing, many homeowners will be contending with the impact of the new federal tax policy that caps the state and local tax reduction. Federal funding for New York State and Nassau County has been used to fund vital programs, and for the first time in recent history, that's in real jeopardy as well, with what we see going on in Washington. So the way that the county collects our tax dollars is also broken. Our tax grievance system has created an inequitable mess, leaving neighbors in similar homes paying dramatically different levels of taxes. Even more egregious is that those in power previously knew of these issues and allowed them to fester. We're putting a stop to that. Our team is currently poring through the Assessment Review Commission's records, and that data will lead us to create specific reform recommendations in our audit. We're doing this so that the public can again have confidence that their tax bill is based on a fair value of their home, not their political connections. So, those are our findings. What are we doing about it? Last year, I outlined 4 priorities for this office to follow, and we're moving on every single one. So here's where we are at 100 days. Number 1, we said we'd open up and modernize the county finances. We said we'd start with an honest conversation about the county's finances, and we've already begun that. We're revitalizing the Independent Audit Advisory Committee to bring in much-needed oversight from financial professionals who have no ties to politics or financial dealings before the county. We're ending the practice of using whatever the most advantageous interpretation of the county budget happens to be on that day. The Restivo case highlighted the need for that honest conversation as the legislature debated how to pay for the $45 million judgment from that case from the 80s. Simply put, we told them that the fund balance to pay for it just wasn't there. So nobody wants tax increases, nobody wants fee increases, as we've seen, and nobody's yearning for future layoffs. The county executive's office is now grappling with the cost of the previous nothing, doing nothing, which has a tremendous cost. The cost of doing nothing will continue to grow and outstrip every piecemeal budget cut and fee increase the county can make until we truly do something about it. So here's what we see. Facts and data can be the antidote to what ails Nassau County. Every person in this room, every business in the county, every nonprofit organization we work with uses data on a day in, day out, hour by hour basis. We all have smartphones. We all use them, whether it be for banking, we get sports updates. Everything we do all day long provides us data. So too must the county. So we found a bunch of data. Now we're working closely with the county's IT department and the county executive's office to utilize these tools that the county already has in place to give people a more clear look at the county's finances. We need to make use of that data, technology, and shared services to change the structure of how our government operates in order to keep up with rising fixed costs and the state tax cap. We do this so that we can get to a place where there's true financial transparency in this county. When you invest in Nassau County with your tax dollars, you deserve to know that that investment is being handled properly. So we're going to look at fundamentally changing how government does business in Nassau County, because just making it work clearly doesn't work anymore. In order to do that, we need input from the community, we need input from the people who are impacted by these types of changes, and we need outside expertise and fresh eyes. Today I'm announcing we'll be convening an advisory committee focused on reimagining county government. This will be a group comprised of business and civic leaders that have no financial ties to the county, and they'll be charged with creating comprehensive recommendations aimed at modernizing the way the county does business. No other business, no organization, no nonprofit, no other government entity of our size, going through the problems we're dealing with, would continue to try doing the same things over and over again in the same way. So why should Nassau County? Our government has dramatically changed in size over the past decade with absolutely no forward planning. Second, we've launched a series of smart audits to ask the tough questions. As a reminder, we're auditing the Nassau County IDA to make sure it's operating as the economic engine of the county and creating jobs for our county. We're auditing the Assessment Review Commission. We're playing our part to help fix the broken tax assessment system in Nassau County, making sure people are treated fairly across the board. We're auditing the Nassau County Bridge Authority, ensuring that funds are being protected and cash collection controls are in place. We're auditing the Friends of Nassau County Recreation, making sure that this entity is operating efficiently and making the best use of its funds. We're conducting living wage audits to make sure that businesses and organizations who contract with the county pay their employees a fair living wage. And we're auditing the Town of Hempstead Animal Shelter, responding to the needs of the community there at the invitation of the town supervisor. We aren't afraid to challenge the status quo here in Nassau County. No entity is too big or politically connected to avoid the tough questions we're going to ask. Smart audits are about being thoughtful and independent when choosing which entities to investigate. It's about following up on our recommendations to ensure they're being implemented and asking how organizations define and measure success. And by the way, it's about having the auditors to do the job. One of the things I was disappointed to find when we got here is that the amount of auditors in Nassau County has shrunk in half over the previous 8 years at a time when we need these auditors more than ever. The third thing we're doing is cleaning up and reforming the county contracting system. I'm announcing today our office will begin working with the county executive to put controls in place that would require all of our vendors to state on an official form whether they paid money or used family influence to secure a contract. If we find that any of our contractors are lying on these forms, they'll be referred to the appropriate authorities. That's why we work closely with the district attorney. We're working with stakeholders around the county to make this better. In fact, my next meeting today is the nonprofit task force with our county executive. And fourth, report it, reform it. During my inauguration address, I announced the creation of our Report It, Reform It tip line. It gives the people in Nassau County a direct way to connect with my investigative team about the issues that they see on a day-to-day basis throughout the county. It's already paying dividends. When we announced our audit of the Hempstead Animal Shelter, for example, people with knowledge of the shelter reached out and provided numerous leads that our team is currently following up on. We're taking the Report It, Reform It process on the road. In the coming months, I'll be meeting with stakeholders throughout the county to learn more about their operations and how their work impacts the county's bottom line. And we'll be encouraging people to continue reaching out to us to identify instances of waste, fraud, and inefficiency. If you see that, email us at reportitreformit@nassaucountiny.gov. So during my inauguration, I spoke about 3 guiding principles we set for the office: investigation, innovation, and independence. At least one of those principles is woven into everything that we're doing so far. Today, all 3 of those principles are coming together as we officially announce the launch of our Nepotism and Patronage Audit. Sound effects for that. We're investigating how the culture of concealment that is pervasive throughout the county has led to nepotism and patronage, corrupting the hiring and staff management practices of Nassau. There are just too many good, honest, and hard-working employees in the county who are forced to sit by and watch those with the right connections advance ahead of them. And that's wrong. There are too many smart people in the county willing to make the sacrifices public service requires, who are forced to wonder if or when they'll ever have a fair shot at applying for a government job. This audit is an innovative undertaking for Nassau. An in-depth nepotism audit of this scale has never been done before in Nassau County. Because of that, we've put a tremendous effort into the planning stages, looking around the country. This audit isn't about rooting out someone who got their job the right way, who happens to have a relative in the county system, who got their job in the same way. We aren't focusing the audit on calling out a few high-profile names of people who've abused the system and then simply moving on and walking away. This audit process is going to be about developing a comprehensive set of reform-oriented recommendations that will ensure the mistakes of the past cannot be repeated in the future. This audit will and has to be conducted independently for it to have any impact. As an elected comptroller, the only person I answer to is the public, and they're demanding answers. After months of preparation and work by our team and cooperation from stakeholders throughout county government, I'm announcing today that we are moving forward. This morning, my team delivered entrance letters officially stating our initial course of action to the Human Resources Department and the Department of Civil Service. This audit is not about developing a list of names and releasing them to the public. It's about fixing the bad policies and guidelines that have allowed nepotism and patronage to run wild in Nassau County so it can't happen again. And we just can't afford it any longer. We're going to examine hiring practices, including the civil service test process. We're going to determine if employees are supervising family members and how a situation like that could be allowed to happen in the first place. This audit strikes at the heart of what's wrong with the way government has operated in Nassau County. As you can see from the fact sheet we handed out to you this morning, staff costs are our single largest expense. And let's be honest, the reputation of Nassau County government has taken a real hit with the corruption scandals and the big problems we're facing. We need the best, professional, and most qualified people to join us to solve those problems. That's what the civil service system in Nassau County and New York State was designed for. Working for Nassau County has to be about public service. It's got to be about giving back, not about taking. There are good people doing great work throughout our county, and they deserve to be supported and surrounded by others who are doing the same. We can't move forward unless we are confident our hiring, promotion, and termination policies are guarding against waste, fraud, and inefficiency. So all of this is about doing more for the community that we serve. In preparing to do this job, I looked at what controllers are doing throughout the country and got a chance to meet with a number of them. We're identifying the needs the community has and determining how our office can help with services like financial literacy and college planning. We're revamping high school achievement awards to be focused on public high school students being innovative in their communities. We've renamed it the High School Innovation Award. Increasing school participation in the annual Controller's Challenge, a high school business competition that's now focused on youth entrepreneurship. This year's competition will feature 19 teams, and its theme will be civic innovation in the categories of technology and social entrepreneurship. We're redesigning our webpage to make it more informative and resourceful in terms of county resources. And we're speaking with and attending meetings all around the county to improve opportunities to make a positive impact for our constituents. We've strengthened community participation in the operation of the Comptroller's Office. We're relaunching our internship program with formal protocols and a mentoring component. We're revamping committees and recruiting new stakeholders to be more transparent, collaborative, and action-oriented. We've put a new level of focus and resources behind the county's Living Wage Committee, which helps ensure those who contract with the county pay their employees their fair share. We're in the process of strengthening the county's MWBE Steering Committee, which will increase access for women and minorities to bid on county contracts. And finally, we've revitalized the Independent Audit Advisory Committee so it's more responsive and can provide a heightened level of oversight of the county's budget and external audit. So that's what we found for the first 100 days. We've got a lot of work to do. Let's get back to work. Thank you. Any questions?
You guys want, we can do stand-ups, find someone in his office too.
Okay, thank you.
Jack, you mentioned the budget deficit, $50 million plus.
And you also mentioned nobody wants to raise taxes, nobody wants their fees to go up, and nobody wants cuts in services. And we've seen that with the Little League debate in the county, we've seen that in other ways. What's the solution?
Well, I mean, I think that's what we're talking about, right? The whole point here is that you have a structure of the county finances that is broken. The county's been in a state of fiscal crisis for the better part of 20 years now. What we see now is that we're really moving towards a fiscal emergency, which will affect everyone in the county. And that's why we're pointing out that, you know, the old things and in the old toolkit are things that nobody wants to see. Nobody out there is clamoring for a tax increase. Nobody out there is clamoring for fee increases. We've seen that, and nobody out there is clamoring for further layoffs. So our only choice is to reimagine government. And that's why we made that announcement today, to bring folks to the table, to take a look at how the county does business, what it's doing and why, and how we can do it differently, and how we can find cost savings.
You think there's $57 million in efficiencies that can be found to close that budget gap?
As Comptroller, we'll do our part to find whatever savings we can find.
Jack, you talked extensively about nepotism. Do you suspect that the patronage and nepotism problem in Nassau County is any different than it is in any other county government? Certainly, it's been long rumored that, you know, how you get any kind of government job in Nassau County is who you know, not what you know. Do you have any evidence of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd start with the obvious. We all read that series in Newsday. It was shocking. And when I traveled around the county during the campaign, I can tell you that people were outraged to see the nepotism and the patronage. And frankly, that was part and parcel and a key ingredient of the culture of corruption, right? The culture of corruption is not just a couple guys in a room, doing things that are illegal. It's pervasive, and nepotism is a key component of that. And frankly, we've seen evidence of tremendous abuse. But as with every other audit we do, we're going to go in, we're going to ask the questions, we're going to see what we see, and I remind you that this is going to be a phased and frankly ultimately multi-year process to examine nepotism in government across Nassau County and all of our governments.
Jack, two-part question on that. The first is, how do you plan to look at situations where, say, the nepotism extends from the county to a town or vice versa? And second, how will you be able to determine a family member who is actually qualified for a job that they're in, and how will you determine how they were able to secure that position?
Great question. So, two-part answer. The first is this. This is going to be, as I just said, this is going to be a phased audit, right? We have a tremendous amount of local government here in Nassau County, and over the next several years, we'll be looking at all of it when it comes to nepotism, and we'll see how it all lays out together. And we'll have teams of auditors that are going in and asking those questions and looking at all the information and seeing what's what. And the second part is, on a logistical level, it is essentially an audit of not individuals, right? Like I said, it's not enough to say there's a bunch of family members here and therefore they must be bad. Rather, it's what are the systemic hiring practices of the county. And so on a logistical basis, we're auditing the county civil service department and asking those questions about what the hiring process is, what it ought to be, and if we're living up to what the definition of civil service is supposed to be.
Just to clarify, the nepotism audit is going to include both union and non-unionized county workers?
Absolutely.
And what kind of materials are you initially requesting?
I'm going to punt on that question, as I'm guessing that my deputy controller oversees audit is going to punch me in the ribs and say you don't reveal your practices quite up front. You don't want them to know what you're looking at.
And you're seeking volunteers on the reform committee,
Yes.
so people can apply.
Yes, we're going to be putting out a call for applications with one critical component. They cannot have, just like all the other committees that we're doing, they cannot have financial dealings before the county.
Do you expect the nepotism audit to last years?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's going to be in phases. Each phase will be, a period of months, but there's a lot to look at. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I would start by saying it took us 100 days to prepare to do this audit. This wasn't, this was one that we started working on day one. It's a major undertaking. And it's a major, I can't overemphasize how big of a project this is, as our auditors remind me every day.
And you said it's the first of its kind regionally, or as far as you know, nationally?
So we found evidence of one in California that we looked at, but it wasn't totally analogous.
Okay.
We'd love to see how others have done this. We haven't seen really good examples, quite honestly.
So if it's multi-year, will there be like a phase one results?
Absolutely.
And that sort of thing?
Yep.
And when do you think that'll happen? Like
6 to 9
months.
months.
Okay.
You'll have your first phase.
Yep.
Like first set of with recommendations?
Yep.
And it's nepotism and patronage, so if there's some kind of political connection, donating connection, correct?
We'll look at all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Follow the facts.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.